Welcome to The Debate. Today we're diving into, well, a really crucial policy decision, one that stands to rewrite Texas's energy profile and, frankly, its economic trajectory for decades to come. We're talking about the aggressive push for advanced nuclear reactor deployment.
And this conversation is really anchored in that November 2024 Texas Advanced Nuclear Reactor Working Group report and policy recommendations. A significant document, obviously, led by PUCT Commissioner Jimmy Glotfelty, and the state has, well, it's clearly signaled its intent by focusing immediate development efforts right on the Texas A&M RELLIS Campus project near Bryan-College Station.
Exactly. And that focal point, the RELLIS Campus, is precisely where the essential tension lies. We are confronted with a critical question. Is the state's proposed framework, and this is a comprehensive roadmap covering laws, financing, regulation, is it a necessary, proactive policy measure, one designed to ensure Texas maintains long-term energy security and economic leadership?
Or, and this is the other side of it, does this framework represent a politically influenced mechanism? One that disproportionately shifts, really unquantified risk and the massive, historically proven cost of entirely unproven technology onto local communities.
My take is that this ANRWG policy provides the essential infrastructure and the clarity needed for Texas to achieve genuine energy leadership and security. Look, we cannot maintain our current economic momentum and certainly not meet the staggering projected power demand without firm, dispatchable power sources. Nuclear is demonstrably the cleanest and most reliable path forward for maintaining grid stability, especially, in the face of variable renewables.
Well, I have to disagree fundamentally there. I argue that this policy framework, however ambitious it might sound, is primarily an enabler. It enables the externalization of both financial and environmental risk onto the public. It fundamentally uses the local population, in this specific case, the residents near the RELLIS campus, as essentially the unprotected test site for unproven technology. And that dynamic is, I think, already clearly evidenced by the project's local impacts.
The working group report establishes the foundation for national energy leadership. The deployment of advanced nuclear reactors, ANRs, specifically small modular reactors or SMRs, this next generation of scalable nuclear power, it's framed in the report as vital for the nation. The recommendations aren't just, theoretical ideas. They are practical steps needed to operationalize this vision in what is, let's face it, a challenging regulatory environment. They propose crucial new entities, the Texas Advanced Nuclear Energy Authority, TENA, which is a non-regulatory body focused on coordination and research, and critically, the Texas Nuclear Permitting Officer, the TNPO. That role is designed specifically to streamline and, yes, accelerate the state's involvement in the notoriously slow federal licensing process.
And that streamlining you mentioned, that's exactly where the risk begins. You're advocating for state policy that basically creates an expedited pathway for technology that has zero commercial operating history in the United States. Not one SMR, not one, has ever been built and operated commercially in this country. The RELLIS Campus project is, frankly, a massive high-stakes gamble. We're talking about 4 different companies: Kairos Power, Natura Resources, Terrestrial Energy, Analo Atomics, developing up to 1 gigawatt of capacity. Now, it's presented publicly as research, but 1 gigawatt, that's industrial scale. That's comparable to a major traditional power plant.
Well, the scale reflects the need.
And it's explicitly tied to the needs of massive new data centers that require a constant, guaranteed live load of power. This necessitates heavy-duty transmission infrastructure. Let's be clear, this isn't some academic exercise in a lab, it's a full-blown industrial build-out.
But the policy also proposes incentive programs, specifically the Texas Nuclear Energy Fund. This is designed to overcome what's commonly referred to as a financial valley of death for these kinds of early-stage energy projects. That expensive, really risky period between achieving regulatory design certification and actually securing the massive capital needed for construction. The state is stepping in proactively here to de-risk the investment for private companies, which frankly is essential if Texas wants to be first to market with this technology. Furthermore, A&M's involvement ensures academic rigor. The campus serves as the indispensable energy proving ground, leveraging A&M's world-class resources for workforce development and, importantly, managing the early site permit process with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
That academic involvement, though, seems to be used almost as a shield, especially when we look at the profound compromises happening on the ground in Bryan-College Station regarding resource management. I mean, the drive for speed and industrial scale, which this policy champions, demonstrates profoundly backward prioritization in my view. How can the state possibly greenlight highly water-hungry industrial nuclear power and enormous data centers when the local community is apparently facing a drastic collapse of its water security?
Can you elaborate on that connection? Are you suggesting the nuclear project itself is the cause of this water collapse, or is it more of an exacerbating factor?
Oh, it's absolutely the final straw, and it's evidence of systemic misprioritization. The source material we looked at highlights that local water supply projections allegedly just collapsed from an estimated 50 years of security down to maybe 6 or 10 years. Think about that. We are talking about sacrificing potentially half a century of guaranteed resource stability for a projected, entirely unproven 1 gigawatt facility. And that vulnerability apparently was concealed from the public and even from city bond rating agencies while this project was moving forward.
And look, this isn't just a local issue either. This crisis seems to be part of a larger systemic problem, where state policy and, let's be honest, powerful political interests, including the governor and the legislature, have allowed external industrial demands to just overrun local resource sovereignty. We see this pattern, right, where cities like San Antonio, Georgetown, and the new Samsung chip plant, which was subsidized heavily with federal CHIPS Act funds, effectively divert or utilize water resources that local communities had previously relied upon for their future. When Senator Cruz sponsored legislation allowing the CHIPS Act to bypass standard environmental review for these incredibly water-hungry semiconductor fabrication plants, it set a dangerous precedent. The ANGRW policy, in my view, simply follows that precedent. It prioritizes guaranteed energy stability for large corporations over basic resource survival for citizens.
Okay, while the issue of water rights and resource allocation is obviously critical, these are ultimately separate challenges. They have to be addressed by different state agencies through different processes. They shouldn't serve as an artificial barrier to achieving what is essential: energy diversification for the state. The state must proactively encourage new, clean generation sources like SMRs to meet the projected industrial and residential loads. Those loads are crucial for continued economic growth. Halting the RELLIS project over what are essentially regional water infrastructure disputes seems like, well, an unnecessary overreaction, perhaps?
But is it separate when the project needs that water?
It's a resource requirement, yes, but the management of that resource falls under a different purview. Now, regarding transparency, the establishment of the Texas Nuclear Permitting Officer, the TNPO, is intended to improve efficiency by coordinating regulatory requirements and ensuring swift permitting. It's not designed to obscure regulation. Texas A&M's high level of academic rigor and its commitment to safety standards mandated by the NRC is a major point of reassurance. The TNPO acts as a high-level manager for the state's role, not a rubber stamp. When you're pursuing national leadership in a critical technology like this, you absolutely need an agile regulatory structure. And that speed does not automatically necessitate a compromise on safety or rigor.
I come back to the perspective of trust, though. That agile structure you describe requires the community to trust that process. And that trust is fundamentally compromised when basic transparency is just ignored from the outset. If the goal is truly academic rigor and national leadership, why does the source material claim, and I'm quoting here, no public available for comment was done on an environmental impact of nuclear generation in this community? That seems like a massive failure of governance for a facility planning to use new fuels and coolants, some of which, again, have never been deployed commercially, with potential radioactive leaks into the air, soil, or groundwater. It's not trivial. So the critical safety question becomes this. If the community cannot trust you to be upfront and transparent about the initial environmental assessment, what possibly makes them think they can trust you to alert them immediately and effectively if, say, a small leak or some operational failure occurs down the road? The integrity of the entire process feels shattered before the first bit of concrete's even poured.
Well, I think it's reasonable to argue that A&M's presence and its inherent commitment to NRC standards
provide a layer of accountability and transparency, one that might be missing in a purely private industrial build-out. The academic environment, just by its nature, is subject to peer review and, frankly, higher technical scrutiny than a typical private developer might face. The TNPO's role is about coordinating with the NRC to expedite the state side of the process, making sure Texas is ready when the federal approvals arrive. That preparatory work is essential. It avoids delays later.
Okay, let's shift back to the economic argument then, because this is where I think the policy truly externalizes the risk onto the public. You suggest this project promises a significant economic boost, jobs, wages, infrastructure, all necessary for regional prosperity. And this vision positions A&M as a national technology hub, a massive regional asset.
Correct.
But the actual reality of job creation in modern, highly automated SMR facilities and data centers is, well, it's highly debatable. The economic risk seems entirely borne by the public, while the long-term operational jobs are expected to be minimal due to that automation. And then there's the issue of property values. They're predicted to, quote, drop once the public knows that this is industrialization use of nuclear, that effectively imposes a direct cost on local homeowners.
That's a prediction, not a certainty.
More critically, though, we have to discuss the failure scenario. What happens if the SMRs fail or are significantly delayed? And historical nuclear construction timelines strongly suggest delays are not just possible, but likely. The policy's aggressive 5-year deployment timeline seems optimistic to say the least. If those delays happen, the data centers will still demand power. They won't just wait. They will draw hundreds of megawatts from the existing ECART BTU grid. And what does that do? It drives up local electricity bills for every home and small business that relies on that same system. So the state's eagerness to guarantee the live load for corporations essentially forces residential ratepayers to absorb the financial cost of technological failure or delay.
Now, that prediction about increased local electricity bills, it assumes that a failure of the nuclear project leads to a sustained, unmitigated drain on the existing grid. But the economic argument is far stronger when you look at the sheer scale of investment, a projected $15 billion for this region. That investment supports construction jobs, it builds up supply chain infrastructure, it helps retain highly skilled scientists and engineers right here in Texas. This is regional prosperity in action. It creates a technology ecosystem that benefits the entire state. To dismiss these significant benefits as minimal is, I think, to ignore the clear multiplier effect of such a massive capital injection into the local economy.
But the local risk extends beyond just property values and utility bills, doesn't it? This project creates a massive power imbalance. A $15 billion investment, backed exclusively by state policy, strongly suggests the city of Bryan-College Station could easily lose political leverage to the state and to corporate interests. It could result in local protections being run over by state courts if they conflict with the project's needs. And the source material we reviewed links this pattern directly to the earlier Amazon drone testing at RELLIS, a demonstration where A&M's prestige was used to, quote, proof of concept risky technology. Even if it carried local risk or ultimately failed locally, the goal was to sell the validated model elsewhere. The community effectively becomes the laboratory for the state's ambition, absorbing the costs and risks of failure, while any eventual success is potentially exported.
I do acknowledge the tension you're describing. The tension between the state's, yes, aggressive vision for national energy leadership, supported by what is designed as a proactive, de-risking regulatory framework, and what you portray as the local community's experience of potential resource depletion and institutional secrecy. This debate certainly illuminates that state policy appears to be actively choosing to prioritize the, perhaps theoretical at this stage, benefit of economic leadership over the immediate tangible resource security and maybe the sovereign authority of local citizens?
And the divergences is indeed profound. We seem to agree that energy demand, particularly from these incredibly resource-intensive data centers, is rising dramatically. Texas absolutely must respond. However, we fundamentally disagree on the acceptable level of risks and the proper mechanism for allocating those risks. My position holds that this state framework is merely the latest example in a broader pattern we've seen.
a pattern of state policy favoring massive, centralized industrial development, whether we look at SpaceX down in Boca Chica, the heavily subsidized Samsung chip plant, or even the loopholes for PFAS and fracking water, over essential resource sovereignty and local community health and safety. So ultimately, this debate forces the listener to grapple with a question that really transcends nuclear physics or economic forecasting. The core issue isn't simply about whether SMRs will work efficiently or on time, but it's about who is granted the authority to accept these massive and, as you point out, currently unquantified risks on behalf of the public.
Exactly. And what level of transparency and resource protection is genuinely owed to citizens when their community is designated essentially as the proving ground for immense state and corporate industrial ambition? That's the heart of it.